If one graph could show the difficulty of starting up an electric car company from scratch, AJ's graph on X really shows it clearly, and it also shows why most electric car companies are going to go bankrupt. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So yes, I am working off this graph that AJ was kind enough to create for all of us, and you should definitely follow him. I'll leave a link in the description to make it easy. Anyway, you can see here, I'll blow this up in just a second. I wanted to kind of show the whole thing first, and then I'll blow it up so we can look at it more closely. You can also see what Mars, when he reposted it, said about this. The competition is doing something in its pants right now. But anyway, the text at the top, the path to generating positive free cash flow is an extremely long and difficult one. Many EV makers will never achieve this milestone. Thus far, Tesla is the only pure EV maker which not only delivers consistently positive cash flows, but generated cumulative lifetime positive free cash flows. And then very importantly here, at present, it is not clear whether a second BEV player can follow in Tesla's footsteps. And then of course, we've got this chart, and just so you kind of understand it to orient you here, this is years since inception. So basically, if one car company started in 2002 and another one started in 2010, they're all aligned, right? So it's years since birth. So this is basically when the company's born, whenever that happened to be, and then you extend through time for as many years as that company has been in existence. And so you can see Tesla, in terms of these companies, has been around for the longest, except maybe Workhorse here, which I didn't even know about. I don't know what the hell that is. But anyway, apparently there's another company that's been around even longer, like 16 or 17 years. But anyway, this little dotted line, which is difficult to see right here, that's zero. So that's basically in billions of dollars, like how much cash flow you've had since the birth of the company. And so at the beginning, obviously, you're going to lose money for quite a while because you have to build factories, you have to design the cars, you have to manufacture the cars. All of that stuff is gigantic losses, and you have to pay employees, etc. So all of that stuff is massive losses that you have to take until you can produce at the kind of scale where you can actually turn that around and begin to generate cash instead of burning cash all the time. And then, of course, if we look at this graph, we can see there are two outliers. First of all, Tesla up here at $11.9 billion, and the only ones in the positive. So they're the only ones in the black, so to speak. And then the other outlier, which has gotten a lot of press recently, is Rivian at negative $19 billion in free cash. So that's the opposite of having $19 billion. That means that they owe $19 billion to their creditors, investors, etc. All right, so now let's blow this thing up a little bit so we can see a little more clearly. So we can see Rivian down here at the bottom, Tesla up here at the top. We've got Faraday at negative 1.2 billion, Fisker at negative 1.8, Xpeng at negative 2.4, Polestar at negative 4.7 billion, VinFast at negative 5.6, and they haven't been around for very long, so they've burned through a lot of cash very quickly, and then NIO at negative 8.6 billion. Now, these are pure EV makers, so you don't see a company like BYD on here because, of course, BYD has manufactured gas cars, and, of course, legacy auto like Volkswagen, GM, Ford, Toyota, etc., because they have manufactured gas cars for a long time. So these are pure play EV makers, but you can see on this list that Tesla is quite an exception to the rule, and that Tesla around 5 years ago right here was, around negative $10 billion, maybe $11 billion in free cash. So they were in the negative too, and quite honestly, I didn't start investing in Tesla until they hit this sort of range where you could see that they were starting to ramp up and getting closer and closer to positive cash flow. Obviously, I am a very risk-averse person, so I don't tend to invest in companies where I don't see a reasonable path towards success. And not financial advice because I'm a terrible investor, or else I'd be much more wealthy than I am. Because I see companies a lot of times like Tesla, and I'm like, wow, they could be very successful, but I'm also like, ooh, they're also burning through cash. So, back in the 2017, 2018, early 2019 range, I was like, too risky for me, so don't want to do it. And obviously, I missed out on a huge opportunity in that case. But you can see the risk involved here, right? Instead of going back up again, if Tesla had not executed the way that they have executed, they could have kept sliding and they could have been where Rivian is now, which means that whatever I'd invested would have pretty much been lost, right? Rivian's in bad shape here. A lot of these companies, VinFast has lost a lot of money in a very short amount of time. Fisker, interestingly enough, has not lost as much as I thought. They're less than negative $2 billion in free cash flow, but they also don't generate very many cars. And of course, the same holds true for Lucid. They're only negative $9 billion in free cash flow, but they only sell, I think, what did they sell? 6,000 cars, just barely above 6,000 cars last year. So that is a massive amount of money. If you amortize it per car, it's somewhere around $350,000 or $400,000 per car that they are losing in terms of free cash flow, right? So that's not the right way to go. Rivian, on the other hand, is manufacturing many, many more vehicles. And so to some extent, the negative cash flow is kind of balanced out by the fact that they're making way more vehicles than most of these other companies. And if you look at this graph, what's really shocking is no one else has turned this corner, right? So you can see here around year 8.5 or 9 or so, Tesla actually started to turn the corner where they stopped burning as much cash and started making some back. And now, of course, they're profitable overall, like lifetime, which is pretty amazing. But they started to turn this around. None of these other graphs show that. They're not flattening out. They're not stopping. In fact, they're accelerating. And we can see that up here on a small scale with Faraday, Fisker, and Xpeng. But then when you look at VinFast and NIO and Lucid, and especially Rivian, you can see that it's actually kind of a cliff that they're falling off. Now, times are incredibly difficult right now, right? Because with high interest rates and consumer sentiment being very, very shaky, and everybody being very concerned about how they're going to spend their money and everything costing so much, it's a tough time to be in any kind of manufacturing process, much less in something as expensive as manufacturing cars and as risky as making EVs. So what overall does this graph tell us for both the investor and the consumer? And I guess back to the investor again. So we'll start with the investor. Number one, even with Tesla, you basically, I wrote back about this, I posted back, you have to have the patience of a saint and a quite high risk tolerance to be able to, do something like this, to be able to be comfortable with this. If you had $1 billion and you wanted to invest it, there would be probably better places to invest it than a new electric vehicle manufacturer, because even if you get your money back with Tesla, let's say you'd invested it, you'd have to wait over a decade before you would really start getting into the positive end of things. So maybe you do it because you're friends with the guy who's the CEO or the woman that's the CEO, I don't know. Or maybe you do it because you want good for the environment or something. But in terms of getting ROI, in terms of getting cash back on all this stuff, this is a terrible idea. It's a really, really bad investment. Even if you're going to make money, it's going to be a very long time before you make that kind of money. Maybe that's okay. I mean, maybe you're like, cool, I'll invest it and we'll take the money back out in 20 years and hopefully it will do well. But the other half of this, of course, as an investor is that everyone except Tesla right here, as you can see, is falling off a cliff. They're not reversing that trend and starting back up again. Their free cash flow is continuing to go down. So that is a very, very concerning metric to look at as an investor. And now let's consider this from the consumer standpoint. Let's say you want to go out and buy a new car right now and you want to buy a pure EV. What are you going to buy? Are you going to buy a Rivian? That is a scary proposition. Are you going to buy a Lucid? That's a scary proposition. Are you going to buy VinFast? That's a scary proposition. Polestar, maybe, because they have a little bit more backing. Some of these Chinese companies, maybe. But it's one of those things where you don't want to buy a car and then a year later or 2 years later find out that the company has gone bankrupt and you're like, well, great. So now what do I do? If I have a warranty issue or something like that, I have nothing where I can go to the company and say, you need to replace the battery, fix the steering wheel, the window's not rolling up and down properly, whatever. That is a scary proposition. And as a consumer, I would be very hesitant to purchase a car unless I just had the extra cash and didn't care, which is again why Tesla started off with the Roadster. They were marketing their car to a segment of the population that had spare cash to burn, essentially, right? They're like, yeah, I can spend $100,000 on a toy car and just enjoy it, and I also have my daily driver and everything. So that was where they started, and it was actually relatively intelligent because you have a relatively insensitive crowd. You have people who can spend that kind of money and risk it and enjoy it because it's just an expensive toy. They also might buy a very expensive boat or something like that. So that's the kind of crowd that you're marketing to, and that works in that case. But to go to the mainstream audience, like middle-class people like me and probably you need to provide us with a great deal of confidence that your company is going to be around. Again, I did not purchase a Roadster. I didn't purchase a Model S. I didn't purchase a Model X. I purchased a Model Y first, and that was in 2020. And that was because it was pretty obvious by that point. Number one, it starts getting to be a better and better deal over time because you're like, oh, this car actually has pretty good specs for the price. But also, I'm comfortable with the fact that this car company is going to be around 5 to 10 years from now. And if I have warranty issues, they're going to be able to handle it. So that is a really big deal for a consumer. And looking at this as a consumer, I'm like, oh, I don't know that I want to buy. Even though I really like the Rivian truck, I'm like, that's a great truck. But even if I was really in the market for a truck right now, I would be very concerned about purchasing a Rivian, especially after the Cybertrucks come out, because I'm like, well, now I can get a Cybertruck. And that's a much less risky proposition because I know Tesla's going going to be around in 5 years. And just so we don't let Legacy Auto off the hook, remember that they are in a bad spiral right now as well. They're selling fewer and fewer gas cars, and their free cash flow is diminishing and diminishing as well. So they'll probably be able to stave off bankruptcy longer, but I think a lot of them are going bankrupt as well. So I would be very concerned about buying an electric vehicle, or a gas vehicle for that matter, from them. But at least gas vehicles are so old that it's sort of like, yeah, third-party people can take care of it if necessary. But electric vehicles are still pretty new, and there's not a lot of third-party vendors, repair shops and things like that could take care of the car if the company went out of business and therefore could not fulfill the warranty. So that's a very risky thing for a consumer. And then, of course, that fact cycles back to being an investor again. If you're an investor, you have to look at that. Who is buying these cars? That is the ultimate thing as an investor. It's like, okay, I'm throwing a bunch of money at this company. They're building these cars. Somebody has to buy them, or else the company is going out of business. Who's going to buy these cars at this point? That is a very good question when you have a company where the consumer is going to be highly concerned about the viability of this company over the next 3 to 5 years. That is not a good look, and it's not something that as an investor I would be very happy with. So as Elon said in response to this post, he said, hard problem, right? So he's putting it out there. It's like, this is not something that's easy. This is something that both as an investor and a potential car buyer, I would be highly concerned about. And this is something that should keep the CEOs and management of these companies up at night, really, really stressing about this. In fact, in another post, Elon said that Rivian particularly need to have massive cuts, and all of the C-suite managers, everybody should be out on the floor, sleeping on the factory floor rather than going home at night. They should be make or break time. They need to be able to get things under control and show that they're going to be able to stem this bleeding and turn things around. They don't have to get back to profitability immediately, but they have to show that this cliff they're falling off flatlines and then starts going back up again, to give investors confidence and to give consumers confidence that they're going to be around in a few years. So that's what I think. I think it's a very, very difficult problem for all of these companies. I'm curious if you guys ended up buying a Tesla back in the day when they were bleeding cash. And if you did, whether you thought that that was a risky venture on your part for purchasing a car when you invested in Tesla. Are you invested in any of these other companies? And what do you think about that? Maybe you are and you're like, no, things are going to work out great. I don't know. Anyway, let me know in the comments what you think. And of course, while you're there, please be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.